Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of a casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I'm a senior world designer who's been working on Lord of the Rings Online for most of my professional career now. Today we have the beginning of a series of very special streams in which we're going to be previewing the landscapes associated with the Legacy of Morgoth expansion pack that's coming out later this fall. We've got 4 regions, as well as instance and interior previews coming up. We're going to be doing one a week for the next several weeks, so stay tuned here. This is when we're going to be doing it. So yeah, for those of you that are new to this stream and haven't been on here before, this is a world design focused stream, so these previews are going to be world design focused. I'm not usually one to talk much about content, game systems, lag, PvMP, systems that are outside of my purview. So if you have questions about how we go about building Middle-earth, how about how we go about building this expansion pack, the actual physical space of it, feel free to drop them in here. I also answer a bunch of questions about the housing system as well, since that's kind of my my pet system, the system that I've really kind of taken in as my own. I also tend to talk a lot while I'm doing these streams, so if it's been a while since you've seen me have a drink, let me know. I have some water, I have some black tea here, so keep me hydrated while I'm talking with you all. So with that in mind, welcome everyone, and some of you may know generally where I am in the landscape right now. When we introduced Umbar, on the far eastern edge of Umbar, we had a wall. Usually whenever we build a region, we need to put up the walls in order to keep people from getting into spaces that haven't been built yet. And for a long time, this particular area has been somewhat tantalizing because you could look out beyond and you could see the landscape beyond that you couldn't get to. And the first thing you kind of ran into was this stone arch up here. Now this stone arch used to have rubble blocking its way, but now it no longer does. And this will be your primary access point into the Valley of Ikorban, which hosts the 4 regions. The first region that we're going into right now is Ambarûl. It is kind of a combination marshland, arid foothill region that is home to the Ambarûli people. One of the fun things about building this expansion pack is we're actually playing around with, I think, 4 different cultures in this region. With some influences from Gondor and Numenor, we have the Ambarûli, the Hamadi, the ruins of ancient civilizations here, as well as remnants of the Haradrim armies that exist in this space as well. Not all of them are in each region. Each of them kind of has their own focus. In Ambarûl, we have the Ambarûli, which are a farming society kind of acting as the breadbasket for these regions. They're their own distinct culture from Umbar, and they're kind of figuring out what their place in the world is. They're not evil peoples per se, but they're certainly, like so many of the peoples that we've met so far in these areas, not entirely trusting of your character coming into this world. So you kind of get to learn a little bit more about them and learn about what their plights are and see how you can gain their trust and help them through everything. So before I go too far into this, let's see if there are any additional questions in here. So Maywin asks, is this still Umbar or are we in Harad? So we are in, so the answer to that question is kind of multiple folds. The physical region that we are building in, we are calling Haradwaith. Kind of like how, Moria, Lothlorien, Mirkwood, Rohan are all in Rovanian. This is considered Haradwaith. In addition to that, we have, Umbar, which is where we were. We have Near Harad, and we have Far Harad. And I think what you can kind of consider where we're at right now is Near Harad, the starting of Harad for us. We're not going to be getting into Farharad as part of this expansion pack, and we're probably not going to be getting there within the next year or so because of the direction that the story is taking us. But you get to dabble into more arid lands, more desert lands than we've previously ever done before. This expansion pack represents probably what? One, two, three, four, probably 7 different styles of biomes, each kind of representing something more on the arid side of things, with Ambarûl being the most lush of these regions, basically. Um, so, so Druid's Fire says, not going straight from near to Farharad because of where they are in the story going. Interesting. Well, I mean, Harad is big. If we take a look at the map real quick, let me back out. So here we have our Haradwaith map. We have Harandor up here, which is kind of South Gondor. Basically, it's the borderlands between the regions of Gondor that we're familiar with and the regions of Harad, which is what we're exploring now. We have Umbar, which is kind of its own sort of like nation, effectively. And then we have Near Harad, which is where we are at right now. And Near Harad covers a pretty substantial area. Farharad is when we really start getting into the, distant, more Sahara-like spaces, whereas Near Harad is very arid, but still kind of rugged and mountainous. It's not full desert. We're not getting quite there yet. We also have Khûd up here in the distance. But right now, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Great. Where we're going is basically kind of where my cursor is circling right now. We're just dipping our toes into the edges of Near Harad. So we've now passed through that arch, which you used to not be able to get through, but now you can. And we're coming up on Telperion's Wall. So when the Númenóreans were here, the backstory behind Númenórean occupation of this space, there was this massive border wall, basically keeping the region of Umbar, somewhat protected from the rest of the east. Over many battles and over many years, that wall has crumbled, fallen to ruin. As Monty Python says, it's been destroyed and then built up again, then fell into a swamp, and then built up again and then fell into a swamp. That kind of thing is what happened to Telperion's Wall. It's been rebuilt and fallen, and now it's more of a monument to the past than anything else. So we're entering into Ambarûl here, and these are kind of the arid farmlands, the arid, more lush lands of these 4 regions. It's not completely dry. One of the things that is fun for this expansion pack is we're kind of introducing a new weather type for a couple of the regions. For Khûd Zagin and for Urash Dâr, we're introducing sandstorms, which I'm going to try to find a way to show off next week. It's a little tricky because of how we had to implement it. But the sandstorms will be our new weather type for those areas. Ambarûl and Imhûlar still kind of have your more classic styles of weather just because of the nature of what they are. This is marshlands when you get towards the river, and grasslands with trees dotted about it as you explore the hills and the areas to the south across the river. So it's more classic. One of the things to note too is, as you can see on here, in development build. So we are, working hard on getting the expansion pack in a state where we can put it onto Bull Roar. So in development means lots of changes happening. One of the things to note here too is if you look at the clouds in the sky here, one of the ways that we wanted to help make these regions distinct is through the skies. And that means we wanted to actually kind of lean more on not having clouds, or at least having minimal clouds throughout these regions. So this is an older version of the day file. We will, at one point, probably towards the end of the stream, show off some of the new day file assets that are checked in for this. But future builds and future updates, you'll have a better sense. Next week, excuse me, next week, for example, you'll be able to see what the new skies look like. Those skies will also be available as housing items, so you can decorate your property with the Ikorbani skies if you so wish. Coming up the hill here, one of the things you'll notice too is right now, at least in the build that I'm running on, there are no monster spawns on landscape. That's actually something that the world team, myself, and our two other designers are working very diligently on right now as of this week. We're at a point where we're starting to fill in the landscape with monster camps and mixed spawns. Let's see if I can find what we basically kind of instructed our designers to do when they were trying to set up quest targets. This might not be the right camp for it, but usually whenever we build out a camp, and this will be a wildlife camp in this area, Sudarun, as it says as I walk into it. So this wildlife camp, usually when if our designers need to test out content within a camp, but they haven't we haven't been able to put in the monster spawns yet. There they are. We'll ask them to put down what we call monster palettes and quest target palettes. So down here, what we have is a monster palette, where basically we asked our content designers, our quest designers, when it comes time for you to develop your content for a camp, drop down just a smattering of the creatures that you want to have in the camp, and then we'll multiply them throughout the camp. We'll populate the camp with the palette that you've placed down. So what we're seeing here is, our palette of servals and caracals. One of the tricky things, at least with this kind of camp, is these kinds of animals may not necessarily cohabitate. So trying to, when putting up the camp, trying to kind of give them their own spaces while still making this a very cat-focused monster camp. It's interesting with wildlife camps. I think we've been a little bit more lenient in how we decide to decorate things. And a lot of our, animal camps end up being a lot more just rough and wild, not heavy on the specific deco, unless we have assets available to support those things. One of the things I was struggling with a little bit was we're introducing scorpions as a creature type for this expansion pack, and trying to think of okay, what are decorative assets that can be associated with scorpions? Like, we have the stuff from Shelob's lair and whatnot, and that might work a little bit, but it needs some tweaking and some refining here and there to make it work. So it's always tricky when building wildlife camps when you don't have specific assets. So sometimes it's just better to let them exist in the wild. All right, so I've seen a couple of questions about mount types that are being introduced for this expansion pack. So we have our classic suite of mount rewards. So you will have your standard, your horse mounts. But while we are not doing camels and we're not doing lions, we are introducing a new animal as a mount type, kind of an antelope. I'm blanking on the specific name, but kind of more of like a workhorse antelope style animal. So here we are. This is one of the first farms that you'll run into here in Ambarûl, and I think one of the things I want to do as part of Polish is introduce a couple more farms throughout here. But so these are Ambarûli crofters housing and buildings and structures. When I get into here to do final deco, this space will be a little bit more alive with other critters running around here, chickens and pigs and whatnot, so that you have a sense of this is a space that something is living in. In particular, this farm is meant for growing and harvesting rice. These are not final assets as well. I think we're waiting on some specific rice frills. But one of the things with this whole marsh, it's a combination of papyrus and rice marsh. So the idea being that the Ambarûli have kind of leveraged those conditions in this marsh to grow those crops and make use of them. Um, let's see. Nizumel says, "Are we going to have oases in the desert?" That's something you'll have to wait for our future streams to see. We have more deserty areas certainly throughout this region, so you'll get an opportunity to see that. Right now, Ambarûl is not deserty at all. It's kind of Nile boundaries in how it looks and feels. It is a little different when we cross the river. I think each region that we're introducing in the expansion pack has 2 to 3 like different makeups for how it looks and feels. The north side of the river um, is a little bit more lush. The idea being you have weather and whatnot kind of breaking over the mountains and providing the rain and whatnot that this region needs, as well as the marshes all along the river, which further helps it be lush. So Liquor Rock says, "Can you tell us something about possible new mob types coming with the expansion?" So I've already mentioned scorpions, and don't mind the TBD name that just popped up there. Like I said, this is an in development build, so you're going to see a bunch of that sort of naming as I wander around here through the landscape. So we have scorpions that are coming up, which are a little bit in this region. There are a couple of spots where you can find them. They don't start really showing up until later on in the content for the region. They're somewhat associated with one of the major threats that weaves through the expansion pack. We also have snakes. So instead of critter snakes, which you all are pretty used to at this point, we're introducing larger enemy snakes that can fight you, things like cobras and whatnot. We are also introducing jackals, which kind of feel like they're more of like a coyote or warg variant than anything, but it's a new look and feel for stuff. As well as bringing over various other creature types that feel like they fit well into this region. One of the things I still have left to do too is far terrain painting and decoration, getting some more rocks jammed into these cliffs to make them stand out a little bit more, give them a little bit more breathing room and volume and breadth. I had a lot of fun working on the waterfalls of this region. The waterfalls in this region, I tried to make be a little bit more, what's the word I want? Organic isn't the right word, but natural feeling. A little bit more haphazard. Because a lot of our like old world waterfalls were very just flat plain. And I wanted to give them a little bit more wildlife, or wildness to them, a little bit more life. Which I hopefully managed to achieve when you're looking at things from a distance and from on the ground. All right. Will we see new mythological or fantasy creatures? We don't have anything specifically from a classic mythological standpoint coming in, I don't believe. But we do have new creature types, new appearances and whatnot that are very heavily associated with the lore of the region, and sometimes the lore of that region ties into a little bit of the inspiration for these spaces, but also ties into Tolkien lore. All right, let's see about some more questions. So Legate Imperior says, "Hey Scenario, do you have a rough date for when the pre-order will be up?" I know our marketing team and community teams and commerce teams are working hard on getting that information ready. When it is ready to be made available, I would say it would first be announced on something like social media, through Twitter, Facebook, email, and also through our own website. So you have to be patient on that. I would expect an announcement on First Boror probably prior to an announcement on things like pre-order. but just stay tuned. Eventually, that information will arrive. So Maywin says, I did not expect so many mountains in this area. Well, so this region is the Ikorban Valley, and that usually means you're going to have mountains flanking it. These mountains are a continuation of the mountain line that we had in Umbar, and they'll continue on all the way up to the gate that you can see in the distance, which acts as one of our region impassables, but leaves the door open for us when we start heading into Harandor. So, for those of you, I know I've seen a couple of posts in the lead up to this of people wanting to see maps for these areas. So right now our maps are in, and they are in a very placeholder state. Our maps usually we don't finalize until we start getting closer to the launch of the expansion pack. Once we're done all of our landscape work, we've got all of our towns in. Right now, our maps and our radar are in a state where we could hand these off to our UI artist to turn them into final maps. But the biggest, most important thing is making sure that we have usability within them. So we can click around, do what we need to in order to go into the different areas, which it looks like, we've got our functionality in. This will probably be the state that our first beta of these regions, this will probably be the state that the first beta maps are in, but expect them to change over time, as with everything else in here. Sergeant Snipes says, are there any secrets behind the waterfalls? In Ambarûl, there are no hidden waterfall caves. However, Urash Dâr does have a waterfall cave. So Adar Helm says, why have you stopped doing painted maps and went with satellite image kind of maps? So I think it was by and large a issue of upkeep. Like having our maps sourced off of our radar images helps improve the workflow process for our UI designer and our UI artist when it comes to implementing and iterating. It also helps reduce the burden of societal knowledge, right? Like this game has been going on for so long and so many different groups of people have worked on it that whenever someone who is working on it leaves, you kind of lose a little bit of knowledge. And one of the challenging things with those maps is because they were very stylized and very specific, you kind of needed a specific artistic style to make them work, and knew how to work with that style and whatnot. And the new style of maps is just much easier for us to maintain going forward if, for example, our current UI artist is unavailable and we need to do edits. It's just a lot easier for us to produce those maps. So I set the time of day now where we're coming up into darker times, or darker time of day. It's getting later in the sun. I think I might have missed the sunset because we were running east instead of west. Let me, 7.5? 7.8. So you can kind of get a sense of what the sunset. Now this will be much more brilliant in the version of the day file that doesn't have the big puffy ocean clouds. But you can kind of get a sense for what things will look like as you're running down this slope. I'm going to pause here for just a second, go back to chat. New birds for birding in the new areas. I'm not sure what our current plan is for birding. On my end of things, basically I just need to be told, yes, we're doing it, no, we're not doing it, and I can set up these regions to work with it. I actually need to do that with fishing. I know there is a want to support birding in this area, but I'm not sure how or when that's going to happen. Speaking of birds, this expansion pack does feature a new, or rather a fixed technical feature for our landscape that may not excite you all as much as it excites me, but for the longest time when introducing our scene files, we could only ever have stuff snapped to the ground. It always had to be at ground level, so we had to build things in a certain way. For this expansion pack, we've introduced the ability for us to selectively randomize the vertical height that something will appear in our scene files. So that allows us to do things like take our rocks and allow them to embed themselves into the ground when the system randomly places them, which is great because that gives us even more variety in what our landscape can look like. So we can have things like rocks buried at different heights and make it look like we have a variety of different rocks. It allows us to do things like here, these kapok trees. It allows us to let them root further down, so we get just a better variety of height in places like these marshes when you're looking at them from a distance. And it allows us to do things like these birds that are flying up here. Normally we wouldn't be able to put things like these birds in our scene files because their origin point would just put them right on the ground, so you'd have weird birds circling, clipping into the ground. This new feature allows us to offset them. So these birds were told in the scene file, hey, you can spawn anywhere from 50 meters to 150 meters up in the air. And in doing that, we are able to seed in a variety of different creatures into the scene files that we wouldn't normally be able to do. We did that with butterflies that you can see around here, so they kind of have a little bit of variety in the height that they can fly around. Same with the fireflies. So I'm really excited about this feature. It's something that I discovered worked in our tools, but never really worked in our client for a long time. So it's exciting to have that feature in, at least from a nerdy world design perspective. So we've seen the Ambarûl, and I'm going to work my way towards another one of our cultures that we're showcasing here. In each of the regions, there's a little enclave, at least, with the exception of Urash Dâr, a little enclave of elves. Here we are at a lumber camp. You can imagine the elves are not happy about this because as we climb up here, we do have a home of the elves up here. We call them the Kintai. I'm not going to spend too much time in here because I don't want to go too deep into the lore and story of these spaces because that's not really my strength to talk about. But we are introducing them as a kind of culture of nomadic elves that found themselves at home here in the kind of arid lands. So generally in any video game, the only quibble I tend to have about waterfalls is when there's clearly no river or pool feeding it. Yeah, and that's something as, when I came back to work on Lord of the Rings Online, that was one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize was, making the landscape feel natural, making it feel like the way we're building things is kind of the way geography works. It's why when I was doing some rework for Before the Shadow, I made changes to the Midgewater Marsh and to Breland neighborhoods in order to make it feel like the flow from the Midgewater Marsh was actually going somewhere, as opposed to it just being a spot, right? I think in the original game we kind of put ponds and lakes and rivers wherever it made sense, wherever it felt good, but it didn't necessarily make sense for them to be there. So my intention with a lot of how I've been building things is to try to build things in a way that make sense. My YouTube feed right now, and something that I usually am listening to while while working, particularly doing kind of more mindless development tasks, is full of like geography based channels that talk about how certain land, certain geographic land formations are made. And that's actually been really helpful to inform how I build the game. All right, we're gonna get this back to more daytime. Trust me, I will let you see the nighttime sky, and it is beautiful. But I want to be able to see where I'm going a little bit first, a bit more first. So IGTP says, so what about that area between Angmar and North Downs that's in the client? I don't know. What area are you talking about? What area? We're talking about Ambarûl here. This is nowhere near Angmar or the North Downs. So over here to the left, you can see, and it looks like I need to do some far view work here because we can see the entrances to a few of the salt mines in the region. This is actually going to be where one of the endgame instances is set for the expansion pack. Each region will have an endgame instance associated with it. So we have the salt mines here, which also has some of their own separate story instances happening. But the salt mines here are going to be the 3-person instance for the expansion pack. All right. Will there be coconut liqueur and fruit baskets for drinks and meals? I'm not sure what our plans for crafting are at the moment. I've been heavily involved in discussions about resource nodes for landscape in these regions, but not specifically about the individual like components required for those crafting recipes. So Arkaros says, so how does Morgoth come into the story? I don't want to talk too much about that because, hey, spoilers. But there is a lot of history in these regions and just in general across Middle Earth that is associated with Morgoth. And one of the things that we felt was interesting was to kind of delve a little bit into Morgoth's history, Sauron's history in this region. So we've strayed across the main road. So there is a main road running through here, which is just south of here. We'll check out this other farm real quick. Go down through here. So there are smatterings of the Ordokai, which are a faction of the Haradrim, here and there throughout the region. But they're really looking to push their way in. And up here, which again I think I need far view for it, you can see the starting of a bridge. But this bridge is ruined. And that's one of the reasons why the Ordokai have not been able to really get a foothold into this region, because that bridge is ruined, which makes it very defensible. There are other ways to access this region, but conveniently, one of the other ways, there's a rock slide that's barring access. And then there is a raft bridge across the river, which is heavily guarded by peoples that want to protect their lands from invaders. So the Ordokai have had a difficult time pressing their way into here in the manner that I think they were really hoping to. So up here we have the ruins of a giant Shagana bridge. Shagana, I believe, is the local name for near Harad. So the Shagani style of architecture is what you see here. You can see it over there too. Some of the Shagani architecture has been somewhat co-opted by Sauron and the followers of Sauron, and their presence still kind of lingers and remains even though Sauron himself is followed. That's sort of a continuation of some of the themes that we had in Umbar. So now here we are coming up on a Ambarûli town. This is Urash Dâr. Most of the settlements in Ambarûl are set on or near the water. Some of them have buildings on land, such as this one here. This is kind of the great house of the village. But there are also many docks and planked areas that the village calls home as well. This will be kind of the major hub for this region anyways, with all the associated town services and whatnot being available in it. It is not decorated yet. I haven't gotten around to that, mostly because of prioritization. One of the things that we need to make sure, and you can see over here, we have a quest NPC who's not quite ready for prime time, but at least he is not a transporter accident like NPCs can become sometimes when they are in development space. So I'm Dunzo says, how much source material do you have to work with to build areas like these so far from the stories in the books? So it's a combination of things. While we do not have the rights to materials like the Silmarillion and Tales of Middle Earth and whatnot, we do make sure to research all of those materials. We want to make sure that while we may not have access to what's in them, we want to be respectful of what's in them. So that's where kind of we start. That's where our lore person, Chris Pearson, starts his work, is by kind of going through that material. From there, we sort of extrapolate, okay, these regions were sort of meant to be analogs to these kinds of cultures. What kinds of things can we bring in from that? You can see here we've got a scorpion motif on this structure. Like I was saying, scorpions do play a role, at least in the old Shigani culture. So we do that kind of research. Then we extrapolate based off of kind of what the intention for these regions, these areas of the world would be, what kind of analogs, cultural analogs are meant to be based off of, while trying to be sensitive to avoiding leaning into stereotypes. Well, there must be a stealth brigand somewhere around here. We're walking up on a brigand camp now. After that, our story folks start thinking about like what wouldn't be interesting for stories in these regions based off of what we have been able to research. How do we need to, where do we need to like creatively rename things, that sort of stuff. And then we filter in like what we want to do with the story on top of that. So we layer in like, oh, here's the narrative we want to tell. How does this fit with the lore that we have that is available? How does this fit with, I gotta not have a palm tree growing in that. That's a we'll fix it later kind of thing. So it's a lot of research. It's a lot of like creative thinking and creative writing from our lore team to get there. And I think the document for these regions is about 80 pages and also has, I want to say, about 20 different maps that show the possession of territory in this region over time. The Númenóreans, the Hamadi, the Haradrim, like what other cultures kind of moved in and then were defeated and pushed out, and other ones that came into power. It's a lot. And a lot of it is not stuff that will, be released to the public, but it certainly is really very helpful for us in the world design team and in the content and quest design team to have that kind of context to build out the world that we're building. Salted Hash asks, quick question, is the engine used in Lotro Unity? No, it's not. The engine that we're using is a proprietary engine that was developed by the original operators of Lord of the Rings Online, called, we call it World Builder, but we use a bunch of different tools. World Builder is our main level editing tool. It may share some similarities with Unity and Unreal. I like to think that this engine kind of trailblazed some features that those engines have decided were good and wanted to incorporate into how they do things. But it's its own unique thing. Let's see. May have been answered already, but were there any real-world places or locations that acted as inspiration for these landscapes? I think we're, for Umbar, we were very heavily focused on the Mediterranean as far as types of terrains and cultures. As we're working on this, I think, North African and, North African desert areas, as well as kind of Western Asia, Eastern Europe, arid zones, played heavily into the inspirations for all of these regions. So you can see here we're coming up on the wall, one of the walls to Urash Dâr, which is the final region. When I was building this originally, the region didn't call for access into it from here. Excuse me. But I always like to connect things where I can, and it felt a little weird to not have some sort of additional connection. At the request of our content design team, however, it is a one-way connection, so you can't actually get into Urash Dâr from here, at least yet anyways, because you have this one-way drop. But it's always like interesting to, when you get into a border area like this, to try to blend cliffs and biomes together in a way that feels good to kind of show a transition. It's easy to do it when you have something like a river. It's a lot harder to do it when it's just progressing from one rock type to another rock type, because we don't really have a good way to blend things together, at least blend physical objects together like rocks. We can do it to some degree with the terrain, but not with rocks. At least not easily. Let's see, a few more questions. Dagger Thieves asks, will we ever get day files where the clouds don't just circle 360 around us, more realistic? So that would require a pretty significant overhaul to how the day file system works in this game, and that's a pretty complex system on its own without trying to add in a new feature like that. I remember when I think it was DX10 first came out, one of their major tech demos was showing off particle clouds and whatnot. And while it's really interesting, it's also like expensive. And the way we do clouds right now is more performant for us than doing actual virtual clouds. One of the things I would love to get back into the game engine at some point is cloud shadows. With Asheron's Call 2, I thought it was absolutely stunning that the shadow or the cloud cards that we had in the game for the skyboxes would actually cast shadows on the landscape. So you could be standing up on a hill looking out over a valley, and you could see the shadows of the clouds casting on the terrain. And I thought that was a really great looking feature. It's unfortunately something that we haven't used for Lord of the Rings, and I don't even know if that kind of feature would even work still. But it was something that I really enjoyed seeing. I thought it felt really, really nice. Questing Dad asks, are you able to show us any new armor or weapon sets? I am not. This is purely running around on landscape. I'm not even sure where the art is in the pipeline for those sorts of things. So all you get is the pretty landscapes for these streams. There may be streams later on down the line that could be rewards previews and whatnot, or other art previews. But for this is purely just landscape. Mario Justum says, will this new height feature only work in the new zones for now, or is it some way to roll it out retroactively without going over old zones manually? It's something that we could slip into old region scene files if we wanted to. There's always risk in doing that. Introducing new elements into a scene file can cause all of the elements within it as they're placed to kind of shuffle a little bit. So it makes it risky to do anything other than frills, really, in a scene file or in a change like that. That's why we were able to do the great frillening. I forget when that was, but it was the reason why we were able to do that, because frills don't change the placement of other things. But dropping in circling birds into the scene files, that could change the placement of things, and that could make things like rocks and trees change where they are in order to make room for the bird that needs to go into. So we probably won't backport this unless we can be completely sure that it would be safe to do so. But going forward, when building new regions, you can definitely expect to see this sort of thing in new regions. Do92 says, any plans to have player housing in the area, or any update if we will get Umbar housing? Also, segue question, can we get Dunlanding housing on the list? There are so many great spots for Dunland housing, and the textures and buildings there are in the files. So no plans for housing in this expansion pack, Umbar or otherwise. Our next region, our next housing area is going to be Rivendell housing. And once we're done working on the expansion pack, the designer who was working on that will kind of pick that back up again and continue working on it. There will be, new housing decorations associated with this. Like right now, there will be at minimum, new day files, new decorative walls and floors, new wall surfaces, floor surfaces, and then a variety of other decorations that can be purchased through bartering and whatnot. We haven't finalized any of that stuff, but that's the plan. All right. As far as other neighborhoods types, I'd really like to build a couple of different styles of Umbar neighborhoods. I think those would look great, and the structures we have for them fit really well with housing. And then I think after that, I'm not sure where we go next. Really a lot of the neighborhoods we built, it's because there is opportunity to build something without necessarily requiring a whole new set of assets. Something like Dunland, I would be worried about trying to build, just because I feel like we would need more assets than we would to build something like an Umbar neighborhood or the Rivendell neighborhood. So coming up here, we have this rock slide across the road. This is the reason why the Haradrim have not been able to push into Ambarûl in the way that they had hoped, because they just can't get past this. They can't. This pass would have been their way through. So the bridge is gone, and the rock slide is here. So Ambarûl is pretty secure on that front. All right, we're going to head back away. So there's still the other side of the river to show off, which is the perfect amount of time to do with what time we have left in this preview. So we'll scroll down. See if there are any questions. So Liquor Rock says, are the stars strange? Are we not yet on the southern hemisphere? So I will show you the nighttime sky at the end of the stream, so that you all can see it. There are new elements in the skies, just overall in general. Like, I think, the world and the skies in Lord of the Rings are, a character. And we do want to make sure that character is represented here in these regions. There will be some aspects of what's going on with the skies here that we'll bring back into things like Umbar and the Shield Isles as well. You can see off in the distance. That's in Khûd Zagin. I believe that's Jarush, I think. I'm not entirely sure, but we'll be going there next week. Don't you worry. So Maywin says, can you compare the size of expansion regions with something already existing? So, you know, I would say that the amount of landscape that is being introduced here in this expansion pack is comparable to the amount of landscape that was introduced as part of the Umbar expansion pack. Not taking into consideration Gondor, because at least from my perspective anyways, the construction or the reconstruction of Gondor was not a heavy lift. I'm talking about, you know, Anfalas and Pinithgalen and the Shield Isles and Umbar. Like I would say the amount of landscape we are introducing here is comparable, if not a little bit bigger. But the big difference is we are leaning into more explorable space here than we did in other areas. You know, the idea being that we have core gameplay area, and then we have explorable areas. And this was kind of done because we wanted to experiment with building these broader spaces, but we didn't want our content team to die from exhaustion trying to fill everything. So we're hoping that we can leave enough space for players to feel like they can run around and be kind of lost, you know, exploring without needing to put our content team through a lot of heavy work to build out the content for these regions. So here we are in South Ambarûl, right across the river. This region borders up against Khûd Zagin, which is kind of our main desert area. So the landscape of Ambarûl is a bit more arid. I think one of the things I want to do as additional polish in here is go back through, thin out the palms that are in here a little bit. I think they're a little bit too common and too dense. Like you can look out in the distance here and you see a lot of them. I think I want to bring that down. You know, I think it's hard when you look at like the near distance here. It doesn't feel like there's a lot, but then when you're getting like an unrestricted view, it definitely feels like there's more there than there needs to be. So I think that's one of my polish and stretch goals for this region. Oin32 says, will there be river fast travel locations? I want to get some river travel in here at the very least to the couple of spots, the couple of hubs that are directly on the river in Ambarûl. There may not be opportunities for them further up the river, but at the very least I want to hit those two spots as river travel. That is not to say that that is a guarantee. Those are stretch goals for myself. If I'm able to get the rest of the travel system done and everything else I need to get done, then river travel can be a consideration for something I put on my plate. So we have a nice hill here which gives you a view of the mountains in the distance. You know, over there you can see Urash Dâr. You can see kind of just a little bit of the hills north in Ambarûl. So this is a very broad space. It is really exciting to be able to build landscapes like this and build landscapes like this that feel connected and natural. You know, and where we do have to have these walls, they feel good. They don't feel like they're kind of arcade game walls. Let's see. I'll leave us with this view for a little bit while I go down through chat. So Saralon asks, a little late, did you show where in the world map this was going to be connected to Umbar? So let's, just for a refresher. So here we are, this is Ambarûl, and we have the Cape of Umbar here. So your entrance will be kind of, you can see the landmark for Telperion's Wall. So this road here in Aradar will lead you into. Let's see, do I have? Yeah, I have the click through already. Into the Valley of Ikorban. So you'll be entering from here, which is where Umbar and the Shield Isles are, and then continuing your way through. This is all 4 regions. And you can see that there's this is an old map that has, placeholder stuff in it. The new versions that we've supplied to our team doesn't have, or has these filled in. I got a little bit more work to do here, but that's far terrain and not principal gameplay, so we tend to avoid that. So let's see. Taurus asks about any updates to the elf characters and when those will be available. I can't answer that question for you. That will be something you'll need to pay attention to Bolora releases about. So when it is time for that, then you'll be able to find your answers online through the message boards. Let's see, scrolling through. So Sarulan asks, are we allowed to ask what place you are excited to build for that haven't been built yet? Eastern Mordor or Rune? I've talked a little bit about this in other streams. I don't feel like I have a specific region that I want to build. I think for me, it's more about the individual challenge of the region. And I can find something that is exciting for me on that front. And that's really the important thing for me. Like, I can usually be pretty comfortable and excited about building most areas as long as I feel like there's something interesting development-wise for me to work on while I'm building those. And, like, part of this whole region was, like, still getting kind of used to our tools, our new, world machine use to build this, how that integrates with our tools, like those sorts of things was really compelling and interesting for me. So yeah, I know that's a non-answer, but there's still a lot that we haven't built yet, and I think I can be comfortable in any of those. So here's another like small hub. This is kind of a caravan way station that's like kind of been left to nature, as you can see here with the sand and whatnot piling up. We're a little bit more arid here. One last thing for us to look at before I get a scenic view and show you all the night sky is one of the last villages in Ambarûl. Unfortunately, this village has fallen to the Ordokai, and they've occupied it and are trying to use it as a base of operations, basically to launch their invasion into the northern half of the region. It's tricky for them because we need physics revisions on things. It's tricky for them to do that because they, kind of need to use the river to get across it, but the river crossings are very guarded, so that, enemies can't get across. Can I sneak through here? I can. One of the fun things about in development stuff is you find stuff like here are new versions of assets that have physics on them that need to be tweaked and adjusted. But these towns were fun to build. Just like building over the water like this was just like an interesting and fun challenge. It was different. We do have issues like this where I'm going to need to go through and drop down things to block the frills so that they're not just growing right up through the wood. All right, let's scroll down. Bane Brood says, where do the camels live? The ones we get as mounts. Camels are not appearing in this expansion pack. It was something where we were talking about trying to figure out what we wanted to do for mounts, and we felt like the terrain that we're introducing here, while there are components of it that are camel friendly, we felt that the region was not very camel friendly on a whole. Like, camels are, for the most part, flat out desert creatures. And while we are touching on desert here and there, we are not going full Sahara. And so it just didn't feel appropriate to do camel mounts for this region. Shmoo says, on some maps, the character arrow is misplaced on the XY compared to where the character actually is. Have you looked into that? If you know the maps off the top of your head that is happening, please, by all means, file a bug on it so that we can get it into the hands of our UI team to investigate. Anytime you think about bugs, it's always better to just file a bug on it so that we have it in our queue rather than asking any one individual of us if we know about bug X or bug Y. Because odds are, like, while there may be some things we know about, we don't know everything about any, like, one specific bug. All right, so here we are. I think this is a good spot for it. Welcome to nighttime in the Valley of Ikarban, where we have the galaxy clouds overhead. This is our representation of the stars being strange. Things are just different here. So I will hang out here with this and go through the last few questions, and then we'll wrap things up. So Folgers Red asks, wondering if Scenario and the team have put any info regarding new housing area. Like I said earlier, we're doing Rivendell housing next, but don't have specific plans for what's coming after that. We need to finish building it. So what is this structure beyond the river? I mentioned that's a part of Khûd Zagin. We'll be going there next week. Are you planning to put some more or less secret places to explore for better understanding the lore in the area? At the very least, in the areas that I'm building, I do want to scatter a few more ruins, a few more farms and whatnot, just to make the whole space feel more lived in and not completely empty. That's a polished task and not something that's necessary for getting our content out the door. Similar to what we did in Cardarswan, in Cardalan and Swanfleet, where we just have stuff kind of dotted around that don't necessarily have a specific content reason for it. Let's see. Scroll down, scroll down. Trying to sort out world questions from Orion questions. But for real, are there potatoes here? I'm not sure what we're putting into the fruits and veggies mix that'll be spawning on landscape. We haven't finalized that yet. All right. So will the instances be released with the expansion or be delayed again? So as Orion answered shortly after that in chat, our plan is to release the 1 3-player and 2 6-player instances with the expansion, assuming everything goes as planned. And then there is an additional one after that will come sometime after. And let's see. Going down through. So I'm not seeing anything else too much that I can answer as far as the world stuff goes. So I think I'm gonna wrap that up. So thank you everyone for attending this preview stream. It's very exciting to be able to start previewing a new region. New regions are exciting for us to build, and they're exciting for you all to have an opportunity to see. I really enjoy giving a little bit of background behind how we build and why we build. So thank you all for being here, answering your questions, and being on the journey with me through Ambarûl. Next week, Same time, same place, we're going to be going through the region of Khûd Zagin, which is to the south of where I'm standing right now, which is a little bit more of our desert area. So hopefully you'll all come here and check that out. Like I said at the beginning of the stream, we're doing weekly streams for the next several weeks in order to get all of the previews handled. One for each region, and then kind of an instance preview, which will probably more than likely just be walking through the look and feel of the spaces, and not necessarily talking about gameplay. It might be something where maybe I can get Orion or one of the other designers who are building these instances to talk a little bit about them on stream as well, but that's to be determined. Anyways, thank you everyone for attending, and I'm looking forward to streaming with you all next week. Pay attention to the message boards, to Facebook, to Twitter, to all of those things for announcements regarding Bull Roar, for announcements regarding release date, pre-order times, and whatnot as well. So thank you everyone, and I look forward to chatting with you all next week.